Thank you all for your practice. So for the past couple months now, I've been giving a series of talks on the Satipatthana Sutta. You may have heard the word sutra. Sutta, same thing. Like I said, this is kind of the difference between Sanskrit and Pali Sanskrit. And as I said, for the past couple months, I've been giving this series of talks on what is called the Satipatthana Sutta. The Satipatthana is the Buddha's discourse on the four foundations of mindfulness. This particular sutta is found in what is called the medium-length discourses, or the Majjhima Nikaya. If we want to be technical about it, it's Majjhima Nikaya 10. And this is essentially the how-to manual for mindfulness. Any time you hear the word mindfulness, whether it's mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based relapse prevention, mindful recovery, mindfulness magazine, all of these things come from this sutta. The word sati is the word that we translate as mindfulness, but mindfulness is actually a fairly new word. The word sati means something more like to remember or to recollect, but in the late 1800s, a married couple of scholars set about translating the Pali Canon, and the Pali Canon is the oldest text that we have available to us attributed to this practice. So as they were translating this, they translated the word sati to mindfulness. And it's not necessarily a bad translation. But in reality, what it means is something more like to remember. And I've gone through each of the foundations in a fairly in-depth way. The first foundation that we went over is mindfulness of body. And so that starts with the breath, and then we extend to postures of the body, activities of the body, parts of the body, the four elements, and what are known as the cemetery contemplations. The second foundation of mindfulness is mindfulness of Vedana, and Vedana is a Pali term that translates as feeling tone. So it's the hedonic tone of any experience. So any experience that we have is going to have the quality of being either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. No experience lacks one of these qualities. In fact, a lot of times you'll notice that the same experience will change qualities as time goes on. The third foundation is mindfulness of chitta. Chitta, again, is a Pali term that translates as mind, but it also translates as heart. Sometimes it translates as heart-mind. A noted Buddhist teacher, Stephen Batchelor, has gone as far as to translate chitta as soul, which can be either helpful or not so helpful, depending on your look on that word. And so now we're coming on to the fourth foundation of mindfulness. And the fourth foundation of mindfulness is what is known as mindfulness of dhammas. Dhammas, in this case, being the teachings of the Buddha, but also the word dhamma in this context also means something like categories of experience or mental factors. And so it's in this foundation that we find a lot of lists. In Theravadan Buddhism, which is the lineage that I am teaching here, there's a lot of lists. In fact, they call Theravadan Buddhists list worshippers, which is kind of an accurate representation, because in this one foundation, we find what are known as the five hindrances, the five aggregates, the six sense spheres. And so with the six sense spheres, I know we don't normally talk about having five senses. In Buddhism, the mind is considered another sense. The seven factors of awakening, and the Four Noble Truths. And from the Four Noble Truths, that builds into the Eightfold Path. And so lists build onto lists, build onto lists, and there's a lot of lists in this practice. And again, all of these lists that I just mentioned are found within the fourth foundation of mindfulness. So there's a lot to take in, obviously. And so given that this foundation is so expansive and there is so much to it, I'm going to break it up into sections. So tonight, I'm going to talk about what are known as the five hindrances. And I'd like to talk about what the five hindrances are, what the Buddha said about them, and then offer some antidotes to each of these hindrances. And then we'll do some practice around it. Sound good? The five hindrances are unwholesome mental states that lead to unskillful action. And these hindrances, they're generally referred to as the hindrances to our meditation, but they don't just show up in our sitting practice, they show up every day in our lives. I think at some level, all of us have experienced craving, aversion, lethargy, restlessness, and doubt. If you haven't, congratulations. You probably don't even need to be here. And, like I said, we've all experienced these things. And the Buddha was very aware of that when he was teaching. When he sat under the Bodhi tree, he was visited by who was known as Mara. And Mara is the demon of impermanence. He's kind of like the Buddhist devil. But in a sense, what Mara really is just the personification of the Buddha's own mind. So it's the personification of these hindrances. When the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he experienced craving in the form of lust. His mind gravitated towards lust, and the story goes that Mara sent his daughters in the form of sexy ladies to tempt the Buddha away from his awakening. Mara also showed up as aversion and hatred, and it said that Mara rained arrows down at the Buddha, and the Buddha turned them into flowers, and they fell to the ground. And then the Mara tapped into the Buddha's own insecurities and showed up as doubt. You will never awaken. Who do you think you are? Playing into his most base insecurities. Fortunately, the Buddha did not give in to Mara, and he was able to move past these hindrances and thereby deepen his practice and then awaken. And so it's these hindrances that keep us not only from awakening, but just from living happier, more fulfilling lives. And as I said, these don't just show up on the cushion; they show up in our daily life. Ajahn Chah, who was a Thai forest monk, said that the hindrances are like thieves that rob you of peace and clarity. Mindfulness is the guard that keeps them at bay. And so, if you're anything like me, and you've probably noticed as soon as you sit down to meditate, the mind's not exactly the most cooperative thing, is it? We try to sit and just in the case of the meditation we just did, we try to just keep our attention on the breath, and the mind has this tendency to just wander off in thought. One of the things that I hear pretty often is that I hear people say, I can't meditate because it's boring. And that's not wrong, right? Like, meditation's super boring. It's one of the most boring things you could possibly ever do. Again, I don't know if you're anything like me, but you'll notice that when you sit down to meditate, that's as soon as the mind thinks of all of the other things that you could be doing rather than meditating. It's when I sit down to meditate, it's like, oh, I could be going to the gym right now, or I could be doing the dishes that I've been putting off doing for sometimes far too long, if we're being honest. I could be editing the podcast, or I could check my email, or I could do literally anything other than sit and just do nothing. It's because the mind has this tendency to just crave constant stimulation. And most of the time, it gets it. If you're looking for stimulation, you don't have to go far in this world. This is a cornucopia of stimulating, addictive things. The world is full of them. And so when we sit down and intentionally do nothing, the mind kind of revolts in a sense. And it's almost like it knows something is up and that we're trying to control it. And it's like, no, stop it, don't do that. And so, we can observe the mind gravitating towards just wanting to do anything else. And this is the first of the hindrances. This is craving. This is the direct experience of our minds just craving a different experience. When we sit down and we bring our awareness inward, the mind's like, nope, not right now. I want to do something else. And again, this isn't just limited to meditation. This, just shows up all the time. My friend and teacher Dave Smith calls this the gimme gimmies. It's like I don't know what I want. You could give me something. Give me anything just to make this experience a little more pleasurable or a little more palatable. And so the mind is just always craving. The Pali term for craving is tanha, and tanha translates as craving, but what it really means is a thirst, like an unquenchable thirst. And so taking that imagery of the unquenchable thirst, like I understand that intrinsically. I'm a recovering addict. So unquenchable thirst is something that is not new to me. I've experienced it directly in the form of addiction. And if you were here a few weeks ago when I talked about the second foundation of mindfulness, or mindfulness of this feeling tone, it's the feeling tone, that this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral aspect of any experience that really fuels a lot of these habitual patterns and tendencies. And it's the pleasant feeling tone that really fuels a lot of addiction. Because in the end, we're not really addicted to the substance, we're addicted to the sensation that the substance gives us. We're addicted to that pleasant feeling that it gives us. And so when we're experiencing this pleasant feeling tone, our natural inclination is to want more of whatever it was, or to hold on to it. This is why they say in this practice that the cause of our suffering is craving, clinging, and attachment. When we have something good, we don't want to let go of it. And chances are we want more of it. And the Buddha used a variety of methods to teach, depending on who he was teaching to in that moment. And one of the methods that he used was speaking in metaphor. And when we're talking about the 5 hindrances, the Buddha used a metaphor of a bowl of clear water. So when the bowl is clean and pristine, we can see our reflection perfectly in it. When in the case of craving, the Buddha likened this sensual desire, sense craving, to the bowl being dyed with like a beautiful colored dye. And so this is kind of like the rose-colored glasses, right? And so even though the dye is beautiful, it obstructs our seeing clearly. And if you're familiar with the Four Noble Truths, which we'll get to at some point in this series. As I said, the Four Noble Truths is a part of the fourth foundation of mindfulness. And again, it's in that sutta on the Four Noble Truths that we find that craving is the cause of most of our suffering. Have you ever had that experience? That repetitive, reactive craving has caused you to suffer? Yeah, me too. The next of the hindrances is aversion. And so where with Tana, Tana is the pull of craving, aversion is the pushing away from an experience. And craving and aversion are really just two sides of the same coin. In short, aversion is the strong desire of not wanting something. Think about anything that you may want to avoid, and that's aversion. Maybe you don't like public speaking, or you fear rejection from a romantic partner, or maybe you don't like the taste of cucumbers. Aversion. I'm very averse to raw cucumber, and I don't know why, but I do not like cucumbers. Again, those are all just prime examples of aversion. And if we look at the experience of aversion, it's rooted in this unpleasant Vedana, this unpleasant feeling tone. And because at its core, aversion is a feeling. It's the feeling that we experience when we think of something that we have a negative association with. We experience this unpleasant feeling tone, and our knee-jerk reaction is to avoid it, get rid of it, or control it, because we don't want to be experiencing that. We don't want that unpleasant feeling. So we have the negative experience, and we just immediately try to push it away. And again, this just clouds our judgment and prevents us from seeing clearly. Bhikkhu Bodhi is a noted Buddhist scholar and monastic, and he explains aversion is the attitudes of resistance, rejection, and destruction. The Pali term for aversion is a word, it's called patigha, and patigha translates as striking against. And again, we can go back to the metaphor of the bowl, and in this case, the Buddha described the bowl being filled with boiling water. So if we take the word patigha, which again means striking against, and this imagery of the boiling water, they both have this volatile nature to it, just like the volatile nature of aversion itself. In the Samyutta Nikaya, we actually find this metaphor for the bowl, and it says, I'm going to read part of the sutta. It says, if there's a pot of water heated on the fire, the water is seething and boiling, a man with a normal faculty of sight looking into it could not properly recognize and see the image of his own face. In the same way, when one's mind is possessed by aversion, overpowered by aversion, one cannot properly see the escape from the aversion which has arisen. Then one does not properly understand and see one's own welfare, nor that of another, nor that of both. And so with aversion, lots of varied emotions actually fall into this blanket category of aversion. Everything from murderous rage to hatred, ill will, irritation, annoyance, animosity, fear, anxiety, envy, jealousy, avoidance, procrastination. Even sorrow, grief, and mild discomfort are nothing more than this quality of aversion showing up in the mind. The next of these hindrances that the Buddha spoke about is what it's called sloth and torpor. Basically, it means lethargy, and this can be lethargy of the mind and the body. So it's this sluggish quality of the mind and body. And so this hindrance is all about a lack of energy, be it physical or mental. The Pali term for this is tinamita, which again is a hyphenate word that combines both of these qualities into one lovely, challenging hindrance. Gil Fronsdale, who's a teacher at the Insight Meditation Society in Redwood, California, said that sloth and torpor are forces in the mind that drain vitality and limit effort. It easily drifts in thought. When this hindrance is strong, there's not even enough mindfulness to know we've fallen into it. And so it's this quality of torpor, this lack of mental energy, that's exactly the reason that I feel that this is one of the harder hindrances to work with. And as Mr. Fonsdale said, because we don't notice that it's happening when it is happening. And again, we can go back to this bowl metaphor, and within this sloth and torpor, the Buddha likened the bowl to being covered by algae. So we have, this stagnation of the water, which is interesting because sloth and torpor, and then we think about algae and we think about the animal, the sloth, and they actually grow algae on them because they're so lazy. When we're experiencing this, the body may feel heavy, lethargic, weary, weak, sluggish, and it may even be difficult to even keep the body upright when we're sitting in meditation. Sloth in this context could also be called just laziness, which from a Buddhist perspective is nothing more than a failure to apply what is skillful, if that makes sense. And I prefer that definition of laziness because it's not about a character flaw. It's about the choices that we make when we know that we should already probably be doing better. So we do have some control over that, unfortunately. The fourth hindrance is anxiousness and worry. And again, with the bowl, in the Samyutta Nikaya, it says, if there is water in a bowl stirred by the wind, agitated, swaying, and producing waves, a man with a normal faculty of sight could not properly recognize and see the image of his own face. In the same way, when one's mind is possessed by restlessness and remorse, overpowered by restlessness and worry, one cannot properly see the escape from restlessness and worry. Then one does not properly understand one's own welfare, nor that of another, nor that of both. And so the Pali term for this is udacha, which means to shake, which I think lends perfectly to that feeling of anxiousness and anxiety, just that uneasiness of the mind and the body. But restlessness can also be much more subtle than that. It can just pose as distracting thoughts during meditation. Again, just gravitating towards wanting the experience to be different than it is. I know I have a mind like that. One that just won't relax sometimes. And the other half of the fourth hindrance is worry. Worry can manifest as just anxiety in general about the future. And anxiety is a form of fear, right? This state of worry about, or anticipation about uncertainty of what might occur. The shoulda, coulda, woulda, all that. And so at its core, this is a control issue. As human beings, we love to control our experience. We have so many things that we use to control our experience, from air conditioning to TVs and cell phones and just all these things that we use to control our experience, because we're animals of preference. We like things being a certain way, and when they're not that way, we suffer. But if we want any sense of real lasting peace, we have to learn to let go of preference. With restlessness and worry, we often fall into the mental trap of what is called papancha. Papancha is a Pali term, again, that means mental proliferation. So this is where we start creating stories in the mind. Around we build these narratives around histrionic wounds, or sometimes faulty belief systems, and we start making stories where there really requires no story. Any of you have a mind that loves a good story? Love to make stuff up? Yeah. I just make up insane shit all the time. Like, my mind just tells me all these things that are absolutely not reality. And if we buy into them, then that's when we begin to suffer, for sure. Because the mind is just always tripping. We worry about a future that never actually arrives, because it's always the present moment. Alan Watts said that no amount of anxiety and worry about the future is going to stop what's going to happen from happening. So really, anxiousness and anxiety is kind of pointless, right? In a sense, it's pointless to worry about the inevitable or the probable, because we just don't know. Until the event happens, we just don't know. So we spend all this time worrying ourselves sick over nothing. The last of these hindrances is doubt. And with this hindrance, the bowl is said to be filled with muddy water. So we just our vision can't penetrate it, we can't see clearly. And in the case of doubt in this practice, it can be doubt in ourselves, doubt in the practice itself, doubt in the teacher, any of those. Lady Sayadaw, who was a Burmese monastic and meditation master, said that doubt is the greatest hindrance. To overcome it, one must have unshakable faith in the path. And I tend to agree. I feel like doubt is the most insidious of these hindrances, because it can stop us before we even start. And doubt's a hard one to overcome. Is that the goal of this practice is awakening, right? It's this enlightenment, awakening, nibbana, whatever you really want to call it. But I feel like a lot of the time when we hear about awakening or enlightenment, nibbana, it's put on this high shelf as though it's this unattainable thing. But in the time of the Buddha, if you really read the text, there were hundreds, if not thousands, of fully realized, what are called arahants. These are fully awakened, fully realized beings. And these weren't just monastics, these were lay practitioners as well. And there were, like I said, hundreds, if not thousands of them. There's likely hundreds, if not thousands, of fully realized beings alive in the world today. They just probably don't go talking about it too much. But if we look at the refuges that I mentioned earlier, I said we take refuge in the Buddha, and we take refuge in the Dharma, and we take refuge in the Sangha. And when we say, as I said, when we take refuge in the Buddha, we're taking refuge in our own capacity to awaken. Because at the end of the day, as I said, the Buddha was just a man. He wasn't a god, he wasn't anything special. He was just, if the Buddha was anything, he was a radical psychologist. The Buddha knew the mind very well. And he knew the mind because he sat down and he observed the mind. We take refuge in the Dharma or the Dhamma. Dharma would be the Sanskrit version of that word. Dhamma would be the Pali. We take refuge in the teachings of the Buddha. This practice, this Dharma, has been practiced consistently for 2,600 years. Since the time of the Buddha, there hasn't been a time when a mindful breath hasn't been taken. And I think that speaks to the efficacy of this practice. And for 2,600 years, people have been practicing this practice. So if you're having doubts whether this works, I don't feel like people would have been doing it for 2,600 years without the threat of eternal damnation, mind you, if it didn't work. So if you take on this practice and you train in the ways in which the Buddha encouraged us to train, you will see the difference that it can make in your life. I certainly have. But you actually have to do it. It doesn't just happen on its own, unfortunately. It would be cool if it did, but it doesn't. And it takes a while too. But if you do show up for the Dharma shows up for you. And I've experienced that for myself. So when we're working with these hindrances, in the Satipatthana, the Buddha emphasized the practice of mindfulness as the key to overcoming these hindrances. Because if we don't notice that they're happening, we can't do anything about them. But once we're mindful that these hindrances are occurring, then they cease to be a hindrance and they can become the object of our practice itself. Sylvia Boorstein is a Dharma teacher, and she said that the 5 hindrances are like unwanted guests at the meditation retreat of your mind. Greet them with mindfulness and they will soon depart. So the Buddha had specific antidotes for each of these hindrances. For sensual desire, the antidote is the contemplation of impermanence. Just seeing the transient nature of pleasure itself. This too shall pass. We can't hold on to pleasure forever. All pleasurable things come to an end. And fortunately, all negative things come to an end as well. But everything has this quality of impermanence to it. Everything arises only to pass away. And this doesn't mean that we can't enjoy the pleasurable things in life. Please absolutely go enjoy your life. But you have to know that this sense desire is ultimately fleeting and impermanent. So, we enjoy it, but we don't cling to it. He also recommended guarding the doors of the sense faculties. So, just staying away from things that we know might cause us harm. In my case, that would be drugs and alcohol. They have caused me a tremendous amount of harm. And I know that when I was addicted to substances, I liked them far too much. So we just are mindful of that pleasant feeling tone, right? So if we're cognizant that something is enjoyable, we need to be cognizant that it might be just a little too enjoyable at times. He's also recommended moderation in things like eating. And one of the biggest antidotes for this hindrance is noble friends and noble conversations. Noble friends, these spiritual friends, this Pali term, Kalyanamita, these friends on this path. And I feel like that's an excellent antidote for this hindrance, because if we can look at the nature of addiction recovery groups, and one of the reasons that they work in general is because of the fellowship. If it was something that people had to do on their own, it wouldn't work so well. They really recommend picking up the phone when you're having cravings. So, we can lean on our noble friends and have noble conversations. To overcome ill will is one of the best antidotes for that is the cultivation of metta, or loving kindness. And so we do these loving kindness practices. We do these meditations on loving kindness, using phrases to incline the mind towards these divine states, these Brahmaviharas. So we would use, with a loving kindness meditation, where we use phrases like, may I be at ease, may I be at peace, may I be kind and gentle with my experience, and may I be filled with loving kindness. And we just recite these in our minds as sort of a mantra, just inclining the mind towards this sense of loving kindness. Sharon Salzberg said that loving kindness meditation is a powerful antidote to the hindrance of ill will. It cultivates the heart's natural capacity for love and compassion. And so we cultivate metta, or loving kindness, and we cultivate karuna, which is a Pali term for compassion. And compassion is just seeing the suffering and the pain in others and the desire to do something about it. and seeing the pain and suffering in ourselves and having the desire to do something about it as well. You know, I don't know about all of you, but there was a long time where I thought that I could hate myself better, and that didn't really work out so well for me. It ultimately led to more problems. The 5th verse of the Dhammapada says that hatred is never appeased by hatred. By love alone is hatred appeased, and this is the law eternal. So we can't meet hatred with more hatred. We have to meet hatred with love. He also recommended the noble friends and noble conversations. When we're experiencing this hindrance of aversion or ill will. To address sloth and torpor, we can energize the mind by reflecting again on impermanence of life and just the preciousness of human existence. You know, we could have been born into any form, and here we are as human beings. And it is my understanding that you have to be born into the human realm to be able to practice this Dharma and to be able to get off the wheel of samsara. So we kind of won the incarnation lottery in the sense that we were all born into these human bodies. So if the hindrance of sloth and torpor shows up in your sitting practice, there are some things that can be done to energize the body and to kind of stoke the flames of our effort. Opening the eyes and just letting some light in. If you're feeling tired, that can give some energy. Standing up is also a good method. It's perfectly it's perfectly acceptable to meditate standing up. They don't tell you that a lot of the time, but absolutely a meditation posture. Changing the posture slightly can also give some energy. The Buddha actually recommended getting in the open air. So even just going outside, sitting outside, it's also a wonderful hindrance. And noble friends and noble conversations. I'm seeing a theme here, right? For restlessness and worry, the Buddha recommended calming practices like mindfulness of breathing practices, anapanasati. He also recommended just immersing yourself in these teachings. And again, noble friends and noble conversations. To dispel doubt, the Buddha encouraged engaging in wise inquiry and seeking guidance from more experienced practitioners and teachers. And again, immersing yourself in the teachings, really becoming familiar with these teachings. And because once you do immerse yourself in these teachings, I've never met anyone who's truly committed themselves to this practice that hasn't noticed a change in their life. And I feel like that in itself can reinvigorate the practice a bit and dispel some doubt. And surprise, surprise, noble friends and noble conversations. Joseph Goldstein encourages us to approach the hindrances with a balanced perspective. He said that instead of fighting or suppressing them, we can investigate their causes and effects with mindfulness and curiosity. And as we understand their roots, their grip on our mind loosens. And the Buddha taught that hindrances are not flaws, but natural aspects of the human mind. So it's by transforming our relationship to them and cultivating wisdom, compassion, and patience towards ourselves and others that we can really flourish in this practice. Mahasi Sayadaw was another Burmese meditation teacher. And he said, to understand the hindrances, one must watch them arise and pass away in the present moment, like waves in the ocean. And so, yeah, that's essentially the overview of the 5 hindrances. You know, I've talked a little about what the 5 hindrances are, about what the Buddha said about them, and offered some antidotes to each of these hindrances. And I would like to do some practice around these. So if anybody needs to get up or adjust or use the restroom or anything, that would be an opportune time to do it. Even if you just want to stretch your legs for a minute, we'll take a couple minutes and do that. And we'll do a longer meditation, and then we'll have some discussion around it.